Hi there folks, today's demonstration is all about tagging people in Microsoft channels using either a Microsoft form or a Power App combined with Power Automate. So my particular scenario is all about colleague recognition. We want to be able to select a colleague or multiple colleagues, provide some feedback and have that post to a central channel mentioning or tagging those users to let them know that they've been recognized. I'll show you that with a couple of demos using Microsoft Forms and then a final demo using Power Apps, both using Power Automate so that we can tag those users. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So here I am in Microsoft Forms and you can see that I have a title and a description already configured. And the purpose of this form is to capture the colleague or colleagues that we want to recognize and also a small piece of text that we can post alongside that mention tag within our channel. So those users will get a notification that they're being recognized and who they're being recognized by. So my first question is based on a choice and I want to find out who from those colleagues do we want to recognize. And I'm going to show you two methods today on how to do this within Power Automate, because when we look to use users, we're going to have to potentially do a lookup in Power Automate in order to retrieve that user's email address. Now my first option, if I bring across my notepad, is based on just names. So I have a list of names that you can see here on screen. I'm going to copy them, and if I jump back onto my form, I can delete my option 2, jump into option 1 here and paste, and that will bring across all of those names. I'm going to turn on multiple answers and make sure that this field is required so that we do get an answer here. But I'm also going to duplicate this particular question. So you can see it's called option 1. I'm going to add exactly the same thing in again, call it option 2. Delete my option 2 from my available answers here, turn on multiple answers, and if I just drag across my notepad again, you'll see that I have those names listed again, but separated with a pipe and then their email address. And so with these two different methods, I'll show you how we can get the mention tags, and then you can choose which option is best for you. So as before, I've copied that list, I'm going to paste that in, and we can see very quickly I have those answers in my form. So my second main question is that piece of text. So I'll just select the text type question there and what have they done to be recognized. So this will allow the end user to supply a piece of text that will include as part of that channel notification. So if I go into preview, we can see here I can choose that I would like to tag Alex, Dave and Henrietta, and I'm going to do the same here on the second question, albeit this is just for demonstration. You choose which one you want, either option 1 or option 2. And then in terms of what have they achieved, well, they delivered a project on time and under, or on budget and under time, and the client is delighted. And if I was to hit submit now, that form would obviously be submitted, but nothing would be triggered behind the scenes. So let's go and see how that Power Automate flow could be built. So just a quick reminder, I have a channel here called Colleague Recognition, and we're going to get our automation to post here, mention those users and include that text that's submitted. So into Power Automate, if I go on to create, I'm wanting to create an automated flow, and that automation is based on when a new response is submitted. So I can go ahead and create that. And then we can go ahead and choose our form, so colleagues recognition. The next step is all based on those responses which we get back from that trigger. And again, we can choose that same form, in this case is called colleagues recognition, and then the unique identifier is based on the dynamic value response ID that comes from our trigger. So our next step is where we potentially have two different options. And I'm going to use an apply to each here, and that apply to each is going to look at the colleagues that have been selected. Now, if I go ahead and insert this into my apply to each, this particular value right now is a string, albeit it is an array of answers. So in order for us to use this as an array, we need to actually use the expression JSON And if we put some open and close brackets and we wrap that question in JSON, and that means that we can use that response as an array and loop through each of those users that have been selected. If you don't do that, you will get an error message about supplying a string to your apply to each. Now, if I go into my next action, what I want to do here is to search for my users. So I'm going to use search for users version 2, and I'm wanting to search for the current item. So this is the individual users or colleagues that have been selected. So we've now got our array of those users based on our first question, and we're going to take each of those current items and search for them one by one, and that will return our users. And from that, we then want to retrieve their email address, because then we can get a mention tag. So if I go into search again and add a new step and search for mention, you can see here we can get a mention token for a user, and to that we can supply either their user ID or their user principal. As you see here, we can also use their email address, but for the sake of argument today, I'm going to use their user ID. Now you'll notice that that's put this whole action here into an apply to each, and that's because potentially search for users could return multiple users, but we're assuming that we'll always only get one response. Now what we can do here is we can actually remove this particular action from our apply to each. And the way that we do that, if we just hover our mouse over here, we can see that we are looking for the key value ID. If I remove that, I can drag the action outside of the apply to each. And then if I look at the apply to each, you can see it's created a split there based on value. So I want to get the first object from our value and retrieve the ID. So if we build that expression, I can go into the expression builder here, type in first. I can select value, because that's what we're looking for here, the first value from our potential apply to each, so the first object. And if I jump to the end of that expression, put in a question mark, the open brackets and single quotes, I can put in ID and hit OK, and that will retrieve our first ID from the search for users. And with that, I can actually now delete this apply to each because it's no longer required. So that's kept our flow nice and tidy. You could, if you wanted, to include that apply to each, but for tidiness, I just like to go ahead and do as I've demonstrated. So once we've got that mention token, the next thing we want to do is to add that into a compose action. Now the reason that I do that is I want to be able to create a string of mention tags, because potentially I could have multiple users that have been selected, and all I want to do here is to put that mention dynamic value into this compose. I'm going to rename this compose to compose mention. You could use a variable, you could append to a string, but I quite like doing it this way. And outside of my apply to each now, I can create another compose action. And within that compose, I can use an expression called outputs. And if I simply name that compose action from above, so compose mention, that will get me an array of all of these compose mentions. And then we can actually do a join on that array in order to create a string. Next step is our post to the channel. So we can post to the channel, and if we post a message in a chat or a channel, there we go. I'm going to post as the flow bot. I'm going to pick the particular channel that I'm looking to post in, and it's the Demo Bird 365 team. The channel, of course, is my colleague recognition, which you can see there. And now the message is going to be based on our what have they done to be recognized. So there's the text that we've been supplied. And I would like to tag all those individuals. So we have those tags within an array, which is part of this compose action, but we actually need to join all of those objects to create a string. So within the expression builder, I can type in join. I can choose my compose there, and I'm simply going to join them with a space. So that'll give me all the mentions for those individuals, and I'll say well done to, and then we'll have those mentions included. Now I'm going to also put in another mention here, your colleague, and then we'll put in their @. Now the way you can do that with an email address, if we put this into code view, and I'm just going to strip back this text here, we can use the tags @ and a closing tag @ like that, and then simply insert the email address of the user that is to recognize them. And we can get their email address from the responder's email. So what we'll end up with is the text that's been supplied on our Microsoft form, all the individuals to say well done, and also your colleague such and such recognizes your great effort. And what that'll mean is the individuals that get selected in that form will get a mention, and so will the individual that's completed the form. So I can go ahead and hit save. We can go into test here and put it into the manual mode. And then if I jump across onto my Microsoft form where I've already submitted or ticked Alex, Dave and Henrietta for our option 1, remember, I have my message here. If I hit submit, that should trigger my flow. And if I jump across onto my team, you can see there that we have managed to tag Alex and Dave and Henrietta, who will have also got a notification, and it's alerted that your colleague, Damon Bird, has recognized the great effort. And we can also see the message here as well, delivered a project on budget and under time. If I have a quick look at my flow, you can see within the apply to each, we've looped 3 times, which searches for those individual users. So we've searched for Alex and Dave and Henrietta. We've managed to get their mention tokens, which is just their user ID in those @ tags that you can see there. I have put that into an individual compose. By using that outputs, we've created an array of those individual @ tags. And then within our post message, of course, you can see that we have the text that's arrived on our channel here. So how can we simplify that? We've got our second option. If I jump back onto my form here, back into the preview mode, again, select Alex, Dave and Henrietta, but I'm going to go for option 2, which includes those email addresses separated by pipe delimiter. How can that make the solution more simple? So the second solution is going to receive obviously the name and the email address, and we want to retrieve the email address. And if I jump back onto my flow, I don't need this apply to each because I'm not going to be searching for users. I have the email address now as part of that answer. I don't need to use this mention token either. So I can delete this whole apply to each loop. And I'll also delete this compose. And instead, I'm going to use a select action. Now this select action is going to take our responses for option 2. I need to use that JSON expression again, or I'll get an error message about supplying a text value as an input to our select. I'm going to enable text mode, and then we're going to build out an expression that will put the @ tags onto either side of the email address. So for that expression, I'm going to use concat, and as part of the string, I'm going to use the @ tag there that you can see within the opening and closing brackets. I'll put a comma in again and some single quotes, and I'm going to put in the closing @ tag, which we can see there. And then if I jump back through the expression, I'll put in another single comma, and it's here that we want to get the email address. So remember that email address is separated by a pipe delimiter, and we can use the split expression with an opening and closing brackets, and it's looking for a string to split, which we're going to split the string from item, which is the first item from each of the select objects that we have there, and we're going to split on, if I put the single quotes, a space pipe space, because that's how I formatted my responses. If we jump onto the form there, you can see that I have the name with a space, pipe, space. So we're taking this string here, we're splitting it based on space, pipe, space, and because of the way that we work with objects, you have object 0 and then object 1. If I jump back onto Power Automate and then just move to the end of my expression that I've created here, if I put a question mark and an opening and closing square brackets, I can put in the number 1 and that will retrieve my email address. So I'll end up now with an array of email addresses within those @ tags. So one small thing I need to change, this join here is based on the compose. If I can jump into that expression there, it's no longer based on that outputs of the compose, it's now based on the select. I can hit update, save that, put it into test mode, and if I jump back onto the Microsoft form, I can hit submit, jump onto my team. You can see there I've got that message once again, and if I go into the run history, we can see here our select that's taken that input there, which is the names with a pipe separated email address there in that string. We then extracted those email addresses so that they're included within those @ tags, and then we've simply supplied that as part of the message that you can see here. We can see Alex and Dave and Henrietta. So the next part of the solution is how can we do that in Power Apps, and it's actually not as difficult as it may sound. So let's jump into Power Apps. So I'll go ahead and create a blank canvas app and give that a name. And for this particular solution, we actually only need 3 controls before we're able to trigger our flow. The first of which is a combo box, which I'll select there, and that's to enable us to select our colleague or colleagues that we want to recognize. And of course, we need a data source. So I'll click on data there, add data, and search for Office 365. And we'll go for Office 365 users. I'll pick one of my previous connections. So there we go, that's all set up. And we now need to give this combo box a data source. So that's going to be based on this new connection that I've just added, Office 365 users. And we're wanting to do a search. We'll use version 2. And you can see already it's prompting us there with the various parameters. So I'd like to use search term. So I can use the opening squiggly bracket there, type in search term, and I'm using tab to autofill the parameter names there. And I'm going to search based on this combo box that I've just inserted and the search text. And so what that means is this combo box will allow us to type text into it, so we can take that text and feed the search to get us some dynamic results. I'm also going to limit it to top 10 results, put in that closing bracket there and the closing other bracket. And we need to finish that off with a value. So there we go, dot value. And that gives us our working expression that will start retrieving names from Azure AD. Now, one of the other things we need to change is the fields. At the moment, it's set up to display city. I'm going to change that to display name and also the search field to display name too. And if I go into advanced, I'd like to quickly check that we have got is searchable set to true. So it is, that's perfect. And if I play this, you can see if I use the drop down, I can search for Henrietta, for instance. And there we go, I've got Henrietta selected in my combo box. The next thing we need is a text input. And of course, that's to allow us to provide the feedback. And I'm just going to leave it as it is. And then the final thing we need is a button. So of course, once we've selected our colleague or colleagues, we've supplied some text, then we can hit the button and run our flow. So to get our Power Automate flow working with our Power App, we need to make sure that button is selected, go into action and click on Power Automate, and then we can then choose to create a new flow. Now, if we use this default template here for Power Apps button, the first thing that you'll need to do is to change the trigger, because at the moment it's still bringing up the old legacy trigger. If we go into the ellipsis there and delete, We can then choose Power Apps and make sure we choose the version 2 trigger. Then we need 3 input parameters that will be passed across from our Power App. The first of which is for our colleagues, so we want to know who those colleagues are. The second of which is going to be our feedback, because we'll of course provide that feedback text in our message to the channel. And then the last of which is the name of the user that has filled out that form on our Power App. Then, if you watched my second solution for that Microsoft form, we're going to use a select action, because we're going to be able to get those email addresses across from our Power App. So with that select, we're going to use the colleagues, but if we select that directly, we'll get an error message about it being a string. So we need to use the expression builder, again, JSON, into the dynamic content and choose colleagues, and that will ensure we don't get that error message. Then I'm going to go into text mode, and I'm going to use concat. And with that concat, I'm going to add those tags for the mentions, the the opening, and then also that closing tag. And then in the middle of that, I want to include another comma, and we're going to insert the expression item with the open and close brackets, and then a question mark, the square brackets, single quotes, and the value mail. Now that'll make more sense when we jump back into the Power App, but ultimately we're passing across all the email addresses with key values, and the key name is mail. So that'll give us all those email addresses with the tags on either side, both opening and closing. On to the next step. All I want to do is send a message to Teams to mention all those people and to mention the user that filled out the form on the Power App. So I'm going to post into a channel. I'm going to choose that DemoBird365 team. The particular channel we're going for is that colleague recognition. And then with the message, like before, I'm going to include the feedback. And if we say well done to, we need to use that expression builder with join based on that select that we've created. So that'll give us all of those individual emails with the @ signs, and I'm just going to put a space between them for formatting and hit OK. And then on the final line, I just want to mention the colleague that gave them the shout out. So your colleague recognizes your great effort. And because I'm going to put the @ tags around them manually, I actually need to enable the code view here, and we'll put our cursor into this spot here, insert our opening and our closing tags for the mention, and we can put the user in there, which will pass their email address, so they'll get a mention within that Teams post too. So if I go ahead and hit save, and then once it's saved, I can jump back across onto my Power App, and hopefully we'll see that new flow appear here as if by magic. So if I click on that, it will allow us to then pass in those 3 parameters, and you'll see on the left hand side that the Power Apps button flow has appeared, and we also have that expression added to our button looking for 3 input parameters. Now to make things easier, on the left hand side I'm just going to jump into that tree view. The first thing that I want to pass is based on the combo box, so I can type in combo box 1 dot selected items, and we want to pass the mail, and that's why we used that expression earlier in Power Automate for item mail. But what I'm wanting to do here is to pass an array, so we can use the JSON expression which we put at the beginning and some opening and close brackets around that combo box selected items mail. Our second parameter is of course that feedback, which is based on the text input, and it's the text value, so you'll see I've put .text. And then the final one was of course the email address of the user using the app, so we can put in user, open close brackets, email. There we go. And I'll put in that closing bracket, and that gives us our final expression. So if I put this app into play mode, at the moment I've got Henrietta chosen. We're just going to choose a couple more. So I'm going to go for Lee this time, and also we'll have Alex again. He was working away in that team. In terms of the feedback, really amazing turnaround on a tight project. And if I go ahead and hit that button, it should trigger our flow. And if I jump onto my team, you can see here, I've just received my message. A really amazing turnaround on a tight project. Well done to Henrietta, Lee, and Alex. And your colleague, Damo Bird, recognizes your great effort. And if we jump onto that flow again, we can have a quick look at the history. If we have a look at the trigger, you can see we have our colleagues, which are in this lovely array here with the mail key name and the value of the email addresses. And we've used that select to create that structure. So here we have that again, the mail objects, and here we have the ones with the @ tags around them. And if we jump across onto the post message, we've ultimately seen that message, but there you go, well done too. And there are those individual ats with a space between based on us using that join expression. So that marks the end of the demonstration. You've seen how you can send a message to Teams from a Microsoft form, tag your colleagues, but also very quickly how to use a Power App and combine it with Power Automate so you can do exactly the same using a select action and a combination of some expressions like the JSON expression and the join expression, and also concat. So plenty of demonstrations throughout that, and hopefully it's made some sense and you can apply that to your use case. So if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon. Thanks for watching. Cheers.